Welcome to Lights, Camera, Kōrero, the podcast where we dive deep into the stories and strategies shaping the screen industry in Aotearoa. In this episode, I'm joined by Payne, Deputy CEO and Head of Co-Productions and Incentives for the New Zealand Film Commission. We're talking co-productions, what they mean for our filmmakers, how they open doors to global collaboration, and why they are more relevant than ever. We'll also unpack NZFC's presence at key international events. It includes Annecy, as well as market visits to Galway and Dublin, and how those opportunities help amplify New Zealand's storytelling. What a treat we are in for. The fabulous Payne, you have been doing quite a bit of work and a bit of travelling lately, spreading the fabulous word of the amazing place that Aotearoa is to shoot in, but also representing our filmmakers in lots of different places. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
So I would like to start by asking a very simple question and a little bit about your role at the NZFC. Tell me what your job is.
What my job is. So I am the Head of Co-Production and Incentives, as well as being the Deputy Chief Executive. And co-production really is a way for New Zealand producers to collaborate internationally. We have 18 co-production arrangements with countries all around the world, and they're used as a way for us to co-finance and collaborate internationally. So films like The Power of the Dog, Evil Dead Rise, and many others are co-productions with variously Australia, with Ireland, with other countries. The other side of what I do is administer the New Zealand Screen Production Rebate, which is a kind of bedrock of film and television financing in New Zealand. And on the New Zealand side, or on the official co-production side, that's a 40% cash rebate that we administer on behalf of the Ministry for Culture and Heritage. And then on the 20% side, we administer that for the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. And that variously goes between 20% and 25%, depending on the production. So that's very big international productions that film here, or do post-productions, or both.
How long have you worked at the Film Commission?
15 years. So I am the grand old man of the NZFC.
I love that. 15 years, sometimes it can feel like 5 minutes, and another it can feel like 50, can't it? But that's certainly, you are steeped in an enormous amount of experience, and you will have seen some phenomenal change in that time, and we'll come back to that. But you talk about co-pros. How important are they?
They're super important, and they've always been important. I think in this context, they're even more important as people are trying to find ways to finance film and television in what is a very kind of rapidly evolving, kind of uncertain climate. Our co-production arrangements give our producers and directors and writers the ability to partner with other countries to then create projects that are larger in scale than we could finance out of New Zealand alone. And the kind of bedrock of co-production is financing, spend, and creative involvement. And if it was, for example, a 50-50 Australia-New Zealand co-production, 50% of the creative involvement would be New Zealand and Australia, 50% of the spend would be New Zealand and Australian spend, and then the producers each would raise 50% of the finance. And there are some variations depending on which co-production arrangement we're using. Say with Canada, there's more flexibility. But in general terms, it's this idea of alignment across per country spend, per country finance, and per country creative contribution.
Why more flexibility with Canada?
The Canada Treaty is interesting. It's a modernised arrangement, and we were one of the first two cabs off the rank with Ireland when Canada sought to modernise their agreements. And effectively what it means is that, and I won't get too technical because it'll put people to sleep, but it allows for a little bit more flexibility in not needing to have that per country alignment happen. It also means that you're able to have 1 to 2 what we call key positions who are non-party. So generally co-productions are based on the idea that everybody involved is from one or both of the two countries. But in the case of the Canadian treaty, we're able to have 1 to 2 what we call non-party nationals. And generally that's an American. So normally, in any other co-production arrangement, the idea of an American director or an American writer wouldn't work. So under Australia-New Zealand co-production, UK-New Zealand co-production, but under the Canada Treaty, that's possible. And where that comes from is this idea that co-production agreements are both kind of cultural instruments, but they're also very, very economic instruments in that they are a mechanism that triggers finance. So it was recognised that in some cases it makes sense to allow some non-party participation if that means the film or television show is more easily financed. For example, American director, or it might be an American actor or something else like that.
Oh, and that makes a big difference as well, because often if you can get that kind of key name, the funding becomes a hell of a lot easier to secure it. How was it that this treaty was able to be such an appealing one for both markets? How did that kind of start, do you know?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think it comes from the fact that New Zealand and Australia and Canada and Australia, the way we work is very similar from an industrial model. English language, marketplaces, the way we finance, the way we approach production is very similar. And there was a desire on the part of Canada to kind of rethink how co-production worked. And we were seen as a partner that had co-produced a lot with Canada. We had a previous co-production arrangement that was more traditional in nature. And we and Ireland and a handful of other countries were given this opportunity to negotiate a new way of co-producing, which is increasingly becoming the model that Canada is using internationally. And it's been hugely successful because if we look at the period before that new treaty came in and the period after, there's been a really marked kind of uptick in the volume of co-production activity across television, across film, and whether it's drama, whether it's animation, whether it's documentary, like there's been a real growth and collaboration between the two industries, including a film like Night Raiders, which is the first Indigenous co-production between New Zealand and Canada. And that was able to benefit from the new co-production treaty that we have.
Oh, a terrific film too. And I guess with that flow on when a lot of productions kind of fled Hollywood and it became Vancouver, didn't it? Where a lot of the productions started shooting, and that huge economy really seemed to burst so much more into life. And certainly not just film, but certainly a lot of long-term shows, TV series, and when the streamers started to kick in, it just from an observational perspective certainly started to boom. So what role specifically then does the NZFC play when at the supporting, facilitating those co-productions? I mean, you guys are at the pointy end of it, aren't you?
We are. So we're involved as what's called the competent authority, which is a wonderful, grandiose
the sound
term.
Of that.
And it effectively means that we have been empowered by the Ministry for Culture and Heritage to run the administration of the co-production program. And so we assess projects for provisional approval and then for final approval. And we don't just do that ourselves, we do that in partnership with the other competent authority. So if it's the UK, it's the British Film Institute. If it's Canada, it's Telefilm Canada, for example. And so we provide all of that processing and administrative side. We also are quite heavily involved in conversations around structuring. So when people are looking at how to make a co-production, we're running different scenarios with them, looking at which arrangements you might use, whether you're using the Spanish treaty, the Danish treaty, South African treaty, or a combination of them. And then offshore, we're very heavily involved in facilitating relationships and connecting people. So a lot of what I do, for example, at the Cannes Film Market is run co-production networking events that put a handful of New Zealand producers directly in contact with a handful of Irish producers, for example, and will take 2 hours and everyone will have, 15 minutes to meet everybody. And it's a form of kind of speed meeting, which is super valuable because obviously we are, a fair way away from Europe and from North America. And so we really take the opportunity when we have a critical mass of New Zealand producers in market to really connect them as much as possible. And in the co-production space, that's with potential co-producers, but we equally do the same with sales agents or with financiers. And our role collectively is really to kind of help broker those relationships that will lead to production outcomes.
That leads perfectly into my next question in a lot of ways. So co-production help our stories, our New Zealand stories, reach wider audiences as part and parcel of that. We're already set up in each of those countries with our marketing contacts, and you've also got the ability for whatever the story to be told is will appeal to both markets. So that must be a huge advantage.
Yes, definitely. And one of the great flexibilities of co-production is that the subject matter can actually be anything. So oftentimes people go, I've got to have a project that's very culturally New Zealand, or it's got to be very culturally Canadian. But in reality, what's most important is that the people who are involved and where the money is spent, it's from those two countries. So again, great examples are films like Evil Dead Rise, which is an Irish-New Zealand co-production. It's both culturally, it's deemed to be a New Zealand film by virtue of it being an official co-production, and it's culturally deemed to be an Irish film by virtue of it being a co-production with Ireland. But if you were to look at that, you would say that's actually not definably New Zealand cultural content, but it is for the purposes of co-production approval, and that then enables the project to be eligible for our 40% rebate that is open to New Zealand film and television and official co-production. So that flexibility means that filmmakers, writers, directors, producers are able to think a lot more expansively about the types of stories they want to tell. They're not restricted solely to stories that are about New Zealand or about Canada.
Fascinating, because I had no idea that Evil Dead was a co-pro.
And it's a very commercially successful film. I mean, it grossed 147 million US.
Amazing.
And it's an Irish-New Zealand co-production.
Amazing. And I think half of that was spent on buckets of fake blood, because I visited the set for that. Now, you've been out and about and at the coalface of this now. What are you seeing as emerging trends? Opportunities is probably part of that, and co-pros that New Zealand filmmakers listening to you right now should be aware of.
I think one of the real growth areas in co-production is around larger budget co-production. So thinking about films like Evil Dead Rise, thinking about The Convert, thinking about The Power of the Dog. These are much larger co-productions. Countries are kind of combining resources in order to create larger projects that will travel and appeal internationally. I think the other kind of overarching theme that's emerging is just that need for co-production, given the kind of volatility in the marketplace, the kind of the challenges associated with financing a production. And so whether we're in India, for example, or whether we're in London or in Cannes, the kind of constant refrain from our counterparts and from producers globally is co-production is even more important in this climate.
I bet. Are there challenges when it comes to that? If you've got several treaties operating, several countries involved, or is it a case of needing to be just really clear about the direction you're going and that everybody's on board and you're sailing on the same ship, so it doesn't really matter?
I think it does rely on a really clear understanding going in and what the parameters are. And that is really based on just a kind of continuous engagement process between us and the New Zealand producer, between the Canadian producer and Telefilm Canada, for example, and just making sure that the co-production project's going to remain viable throughout the process. Because with some of the benefits that come with an official co-production being deemed as a local production here, for example, and in Canada, there's the ability to apply for Film Commission production funding.
Yeah.
There's the ability to access the 40% rebate. But with that comes some parameters around making sure your alignment works, making sure you're not having non-party involvement that's not going to make the structure viable. So there's a lot of engagement from a structuring point of view. And then the other part is that we invest a lot of time and effort in nurturing relationships with the other competent authorities. So we spend a lot of time talking with Telefilm Canada. We spend a lot of time talking with the British Film Institute, with Screen Australia, so that when we do encounter issues around non-compliance or otherwise, we're able to kind of work through it together in a collaborative way.
And that comes right back to the beginning again about relationships, doesn't it?
It does.
It's knowing exactly the person to pick up the phone and go, let's solve this problem and let's solve it together.
Exactly right.
Now, we've talked a lot about Ireland, but also France here. You've been to Ireland and France on behalf of the Commission recently. So Galway, Dublin and Annecy. So why those three fabulous places?
So Galway was really in support of a wonderful initiative that Screen Wellington has underway, which is an Indigenous animation exchange between Galway and Wellington. So both Galway and Wellington are UNESCO cities of film. And one of the initiatives that those two cities have developed is this reciprocal exchange. So there was a wonderful Irish language animator who came down to Wellington and spent some time in Wellington. She participated in the Māoriland Film Festival. And then in turn, a Māori animator spent time in Galway meeting with counterparts, looking at opportunities for collaboration, understanding the types of stories that are told in Ireland. So we were there there really in celebration of the existing work that's happened between Ireland and New Zealand. So films like Come to Daddy and Evil Dead Rise, and then also series like The Gone, which is now in its second season.
Is that a co-pro?
They're all Irish-New Zealand co-productions.
Love that.
And we're very keen to kind of develop more and more co-production with Ireland. It's English language, EU, member state. And there's a huge synergy, I think, between the stories that we want to tell and our filmmakers, really. So
and
that's Ireland. And our humour.
I think we're both very funny. The Irish are very funny. New Zealanders are very funny.
Yes.
And we like the odd cuss word here and there.
Yes.
Yeah. Annecy, the film festival there has a very strong animation aspect to it. It's not fully animation though, is it?
It is.
Is it?
It is the world's largest and most important animation film festival. And it also has a market called MIFA. And we were there really largely focused on MIFA. We had over 30 New Zealand animators, directors.
What does MIFA stand for?
It is a French acronym which I won't attempt to garble, but it effectively is the market of international film animation.
Amazing.
And it is the biggest meeting place in the same way that the Cannes film market is the biggest film market for live action, although with some animation. This is the biggest purely animation-focused market. And it brings everybody from, Hollywood studio execs, from Disney, from Netflix, Sony, everywhere else, right through to the very bespoke, low-budget European, cardboard cutout, stop-motion animation.
I was just going to say, with their little bits of plasticine,
exactly,
rolling it together.
Exactly.
Honestly, I adore the fact that animation is no longer, a Disney cartoon, and adult stories are told in incredible ways. I remember watching a film, and I'm going to forget its name, but I think it was called Waltz with Bashir.
Yes.
And fully animated. Crippled me. It was just so phenomenally done. It was really intense, and I love that these stories are being told by filmmakers that have so much to say. So is this a big growth market? And particularly if we've got New Zealand filmmakers, animators listening to this,
definitely, it's a huge growth area for New Zealand, and we've had a tradition of wonderful animation in New Zealand for television. We haven't had quite such a long history of feature animation in New Zealand. As a film agency, we've funded a lot of short animation, but we've been less successful in helping directors move into kind of feature animation. So a big focus for us really is how we help the New Zealand animation industry grow, and that's grow in terms of scale, but it's also in terms of the aspirations for their storytelling. So wonderful shows in New Zealand like Curry and Lou, or Darwin and Newts, many, many others. How do we help those filmmakers move into feature animation? And the Film Commission has recently supported the feature film spin-off of Curry and Lou, which is terrific. So we're looking forward to seeing that in the next couple of years.
Amazing.
But that area, animation generally, I think, is a space that we can really own a lot more than we have traditionally. And I look at countries like Ireland, which has got a booming animation industry. Think about the role that co-production can play, where people can co-produce with New Zealand without necessarily having to travel here if it's animation. And also just thinking about that kind of poeticism that you've talked about in terms of Waltz with Bashir, amazing. And trying to imagine that film in live action versus how it was done in animation. There's obviously a wealth of stories from Te Ao Māori, and there's a wealth of Pacific stories that I think would just be really well suited for animation.
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. Now, international travel that you're doing, and again, fostering those relationships, which we know are so important. So hopping on a plane, going over and doing those things, it's not the same as a Zoom, is it? It's a really important part of your job.
It's super important. I think we've all, had a lot of time in Zoom meetings, a lot of time in Teams meetings, and they're quite good when you have a pre-existing relationship and there's a shorthand and there's a trust that underpins it. I think it's much harder for people who are trying to establish new relationships with people. It's just not the same as being in the room, pressing the flesh, having those sort of social engagements that then build that trust and that kind of understanding. And I think, for us at the bottom of the world, that we need to be in the market, we need to be in person, we need to be in the conversation, literally, to make sure that people understand that, we do have a wealth of great stories, storytellers, and it's just not the same trying to create that impression virtually.
It's so much easier, is it, if you just can hop on a train and cross the border from Spain to France to have that chat. So
true.
We have to bear that in mind. Our isolation is a gift and a challenge. Now, we did have a very quick chat about the treaties, and you've just been in Ireland. And I'd like to get a sense, I think that CoPro's been in place for around a couple of decades. Would that be right with Ireland?
It has been around for a while.
Around about that.
Yeah.
So what did this trip reveal about how that relationship is evolving? And again, when it comes to these ongoing treaties, how important it is to be there and in the room and having those conversations?
I think the trip really did reaffirm for me that there's a genuine desire between both countries to collaborate, both between us and Screen Ireland, but also between New Zealand filmmakers and Irish filmmakers. So I think I would really, really love to see more co-production happen between New Zealand and Ireland. I think there's a huge opportunity in terms of Irish language and Māori storytelling, and looking at a really interesting kind of marriage or kind of combination of those two. I think about some of the more culturally specific Irish animation like Song of the Sea, Wolf Walkers, these incredible feature animations that are deeply grounded in Irish culture, made by Cartoon Saloon, which is really kind of the poster child of what happens when you support and kind of supercharge an industry. Like Cartoon Saloon was established, they were primarily working in service work on international productions. Over time, they developed their own original IP, and now they're very, very successful, Academy Award nominated, while still working in terms of global market. So very, very exciting for New Zealand, and I would like to see new ways of collaborating.
So this Indigenous animation exchange between Galway and Wellington seems to feed off exactly what you were just saying, and it sounds like a standout initiative. What's the long-term vision for this kaupapa?
It's really one that's run by Screen Wellington. So Tanya Black has done a huge amount of mahi to kind of move that initiative forward. But for the Film Commission, which is a very, very strong champion of that particular kaupapa, we see huge opportunity for Indigenous co-production to emerge in animation. We also see a huge opportunity for talent exchange, for knowledge sharing, and for new ways of elevating Indigenous storytelling. It's only really in its first year. So the first visitor from Ireland has come, and then the return visitor was up with us when we were in Galway and then in Dublin. So we're really looking forward to seeing it grow, and potentially looking at growing other limbs and thinking about other countries, potentially other UNESCO cities of film that could align. I think the sort of sky's the limit with that, really.
How did I not know that Wellington was a UNESCO city of film, and how does one qualify for that prestigious title? There
is a very lengthy, I gather, and somewhat involved process that Tanya Black can speak to in a lot of detail. But there are a number of UNESCO cities of film all around the world, through Asia, through Europe, obviously down here. And we see huge potential for those relationships to grow co-production opportunities, with various countries that we have arrangements with, but also just to more generally connect cities and connect the people within those cities.
Just speaking to the Dublin trip and the Galway leg of it as well, were there any standout kind of conversations, takeaways or outcomes from that trip that made your heart sing?
I think there were a number of great meetings that we took, particularly in Dublin, as well as a really memorable meeting with a number of leading producers in Galway, which was really terrific. I think the New Zealand cohort that were with us at Annecy all saw it as hugely productive. They managed to meet a number of potential co-producers. I know they're talking to a lot of networks, they're talking to sales agents, they're seeking finance for their shows. And in terms of the meetings that I took, had some incredible meetings with Sony Pictures Animation and a number of other, major players in the animation world, all who were really interested in New Zealand, the stories that are coming through. And there's a recognition, I think, globally that good stories can come from anywhere, and local language and the cultural specificity of that story is a real value plus. I think that is a real change in some respects that has arisen since the pandemic, where people have been more used to seeing things subtitled. There's a more openness to authentic storytelling in the language of that place. How does cultural storytelling and presence at events like Annecy help shape perceptions of Aotearoa globally, do you think? I think screen storytelling is hugely important as part of our cultural diplomacy activities. Oftentimes, the points of connection that people will make will be our stories, our films. That's what people kind of connect with. And a place like Annecy, animation, I think, is a huge enabler for New Zealand. We're less known in terms of our original animation. We're known as a place where Weta Effects creates incredible worlds, or Peter Jackson and Park Road Post-Production do incredible things. And I think we now have an opportunity for New Zealand to be known as much for our locations and our incredible crew and our incredible cast as our prowess digitally. Obviously, Weta Effects and others have been amazing in terms of creating that brand, but I do think we have more room to grow as a digital destination and partner of choice for the world, and for that to kind of inform our cultural soft power.
You've made a point. If we look at setting up a live action production and all of that brings in, and it's, down at Lake Wakatipu, or it's, up on the Remarkables, or wherever it might be, when we are telling stories, and you said digitally, obviously, with animation, our isolation is neither here nor there. Is it?
Exactly.
So that's a huge advantage.
It's a real advantage. And oftentimes, when I'm in Cannes or somewhere else, I would have conversations with someone who says, "Oh, I love New Zealand. I would love to work with New Zealand, but you're so far away." And oftentimes we're able to say, well, actually, it's not that far. Like, it's the same distance between LA and Heathrow as it is between LA and Auckland, for example. But that opportunity that comes with digital collaboration really does remove that tyranny of distance. So, and the other benefit, really, if we're thinking about animation, is that you effectively are creating a 24-hour production pipeline with the time difference. So if we're co-producing with Europe, for example, you've effectively got a 24-hour production happening with work in Ireland and then work in New Zealand. So
no one ever sleeps.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, well, that's what it must feel like in a sense, because everyone's just working in their own time. So
that's right.
That's absolutely brilliant. You mentioned, of course, about MIFA, and that this year marked the first time New Zealand's ever had a booth there. So why was it the right time to make that move and really have a showing at Annecy?
We have decided as an organisation to be more involved in supporting animation. And so a key part of that was our support for the Wellington Animation Film Festival, which is now in its second year. We've also unlocked additional funding for Catalyst, one of our funding strands, to enable people to make animated short films that are then tied to a feature film outcome. And we then decided that actually, as part of that strategy around increasing animation, we needed to be at the biggest animation event, in the world. And that involved us being in Annecy, being visible, having a booth in the MIFA, doing a panel session around working with New Zealand, profiling some of our animation studios, and then being there also in support of Weta Effects, which did an incredible studio focus session, which really kind of shows what's possible at the very, very big end of town, while also we were there to be able to profile people working in all these other ways, lower budget, 2D, stop motion, claymation, everything else, and showing that New Zealand's open for business, that New Zealand is able to work in different modes and at different price points.
How did you find the response?
Really strong, a huge amount of interest. I think we're seen as quite a new market when it comes to animation. I think we're known for our locations. We're known for a lot of our live action cinema. We're less known for animation. And I think there's a wealth of new stories coming through from Māori, from Pacific, from Asian New Zealanders as well, that are really quite different. And I think they have a natural connection oftentimes with Asia, stories of diaspora or of experience. And I think there's a real interest in tapping into some of these stories for a global audience.
You've said that animation is a real strategic growth area for the New Zealand screen sector right now. So bearing that in mind, what are the global trends then?
Look, I think there is really no limit on the types of stories and the types of audiences New Zealand animation will connect with. We've obviously got a strong history of preschool animation funded by New Zealand On Air, funded by Te Māngai Pāho. again, wonderful shows like Kerry and Lou, Darwin and Newts, others, etc. There have been feature animations made in New Zealand, like Moseley, which was a China-New Zealand official co-production, like 25 April, which was an animated documentary about Gallipoli.
Fantastic.
And I think there's the huge potential for all types of animation, and we're seeing a lot of animation studios that are working very specifically in stop motion or very specifically in 2D, like the team at Makpari who do Bad Jelly, for example. So I think really it's just a question of finding stories that will connect with the market and which have the ability to connect with audiences.
100%.
And all forms of storytelling, all audiences are accessible.
So that's a good point you make there. We talk about all forms of storytelling. What we're also seeing is people watching I'm going to say the terrible C word, content, because there is a huge growth market, isn't there, in vertical shorts. And, I mean, animation is, I would say, would just be like a perfect fit for that. I mean, how does that fit into the fabric or the remit of the Film Commission?
Definitely. Definitely that type of content is growing. It's huge in Asia, mobile-based short form, vertical content. We're very open to all sorts of content through the co-production structure and through the incentive structure. So as a film commission, our primary focus in terms of the funding we have to invest is really in terms of feature film and short films as a pathway to feature film.
Yeah.
But the area that I work in with my colleagues in co-production incentives is format agnostic. So we're supportive of co-productions that might be web series or that might be feature film or series for streaming or for broadcast. So more flexibility there.
Love that. I'm taking format agnostic and I'm integrating it into my vernacular because that's so descriptive. I was so lucky recently. I was on the jury at the New Zealand Whānau Marama International Film Festival, and one of the films that had so much power for me was an Alan George film called Miru Miru, and it was a phenomenal short story about a Māori couple dealing with Alzheimer's. And for me, that was the perfect example of the power of animation to tell a story almost in a fantastical way, memories and bubbles, and in a way that live action can't do. So there's an enormous power, isn't there, within animation that perhaps is really underestimated.
Yes, completely agree. And I was similarly moved by that film. I saw it recently, actually at Whānau Marama as well. And I remember being profoundly kind of affected by it. And we were fortunate enough to have the producer of that film, Jason Taylor, with us in Annecy at MIFA. We had the poster for Miru Miru on our booth, and people loved it.
Well, the animation was so gorgeous.
So
the poster
gorgeous.
Must be stunning.
He was actually part of a panel that we did on animation in New Zealand, and he spoke incredibly beautifully and poetically about both that film, but also about the poeticism and the kind of scale and impact that animation can have in a way that live action kind of can't really do. And so looking at stories from Te Ao Māori, looking at, myth and looking at kind of metaphor, there's this huge potential for animation, I think. And we look at films like Waltz with Bashir or Persepolis or some of the films that Cartoon Saloon has made in Ireland, and it really does show the kind of beauty of animation and, again, that kind of poeticism. So completely agree, Kate.
How is the NZFC supporting growth, right? From funding and travel grants to capability development and international showcases. We've got filmmakers that want to tell stories using animation. How are you going to support them?
Well, through our support of projects, primarily, that's one mechanism, through the development and production of those projects and the role we can play in helping enable those storytellers. But also in terms of our ability to travel people to upskill. So looking at labs for projects or professional development opportunities for filmmakers. Looking at being able to send New Zealand producers to co-production markets where they can find co-production partners, or financiers, or a distribution partner, whether it's a streamer or a sales agent that will sell the rights for that film around the world. Looking at the role we can play in a country like India in terms of introducing New Zealand stories, New Zealand talent, looking at co-production opportunities with that country, while also trying to see whether there's an opportunity for Indian production to come and film in New Zealand or do post-production New Zealand. In the early 2000s and late 1990s, there was a huge volume of Indian production that was shot in New Zealand, primarily Bollywood, but not exclusively. And we're really interested in seeing what the opportunity is to kind of encourage India back to New Zealand from a kind of inbound point of view as well. And one of the incredible benefits of that production activity at that time was a very noticeable uptick in terms of tourism, but also education, with a lot of Indian tourists coming to New Zealand off the back of films, and then also looking at export education. So a lot of Indian students coming to New Zealand. And again, that goes to your earlier point about soft power and the role that played in helping to kind of position New Zealand as a tourism destination, as an export education destination.
That's fascinating, isn't it? And I've always sort of felt that about film when we talk about the ecosystem that surrounds it and supports it, and the way that the tendrils of it go out into so many different fabrics of the New Zealand economy, but also just of who we are in a lot of ways, isn't it? This is kind of what's next for the Film Commission's international relationship building. What's next?
What's next? So India is part of our What's Next. I was fortunate enough to go to Film Bazaar in Goa in November last year. And then Annie, our CEO, and I were in Mumbai in May on the way to London and then Cannes. And we were there for something called the World Audiovisual Entertainment Summit, or WAVES, which is a new structure that's been supported very heavily by the Indian government and was headlined by Prime Minister Modi. And we're very interested in looking at opportunities with India, as I've touched on, both in terms of co-production, in terms of career opportunities for New Zealand filmmakers and actors working in India, and then also looking at what role we could play in Indian production, looking to film or do post-production here in New Zealand. I think other areas of real focus, as we've touched on, are things like animation, how we better support that, enable that, how we increase the value of New Zealand's co-production arrangements. So one of the really great things about the Amplify strategy that's been released recently is a specific call out around the value of co-production and the role that it has for New Zealand going forward. So co-production, animation, India, looking at new ways of supporting filmmakers to have international careers and to tell culturally specific stories that resonate internationally. And we really look at a film like Tina as a wonderful example
Amazing.
Of the specific being the universal, and looking at the appeal of that film in Australia. We've got so many diplomatic posts around the world all contacting us saying, we want to organise a screening of Tina. We've had recently one in LA with the consulate. We've had one in Washington, DC with their embassy. There's a huge interest in that film and what it signifies, really. So.
Love that. Hey, Chris, I knew you would be here. You've been outstanding. I just want to kind of wrap it up because I feel you're the perfect person that can maybe will have taken the temperature of the global film industry at this point in a year. But you've been in this business a long time. Coming back after all of these visits, can you tell us how the industry is feeling globally, in your view?
I think there's a fair degree of uncertainty globally. I think change really is the real constant at the moment. And I think people are looking at new ways of approaching the industry and the business of it, what underpins it, how to finance things, how to package things, how to structure things in a kind of rapidly evolving environment. We've kind of had this constant period of change since the pandemic with the rise of AI, the strikes that you talked about, virtual production, the streamer model kind of changing, what's happening with theatrical. Like there's a kind of perfect storm of kind of changes. And I think, personally, obviously for me, a big part of how we respond to that is co-production and the role that we can have in helping tell global stories in partnership with others. And I also think it's really about looking at audience really closely and saying, how are our stories connecting and why? And looking at films like Tina and looking at, the really specific stories that will travel and represent New Zealand really well. And having that age-old balance of kind of cultural and commercial, and recognizing that in some cases a project will have really strong cultural merits and we don't expect necessarily that will have a huge commercial return. But equally, there might be projects that we see as hugely commercial and, we celebrate the fact that they're, very successful commercially.
I love that. A perfect way of wrapping it up. That was outstanding. Chris, thank you so much for joining us. And lights, camera, kōrero, ngā mihi nui, and thank you.
Thank you.
Ngā mihi, and a big thanks to Chris for joining us and sharing his expertise on international co-productions and the New Zealand Film Commission's Global Mahi.